Aloha and welcome to another edition of our tutorials here on Adobe Premiere. In this short video, we're going to talk about how to do a green screen. Now, I have some footage here that Sister Malia asked for my help with. So we shot her in front of the green screen across the hall, and then she also emailed me a PowerPoint presentation, which I exported the slides from as graphic images. So I'm going to start. I've got an empty project that I've created. I'm going to start by importing that footage. And I'm looking for this Sister Malia folder. This one, the 100 JVC AP, that's the file naming structure used by my JVC cameras. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click that folder and import it in its entirety. And I'm going to get some warning messages. Don't worry about those. There's some extra garbage in that folder that just isn't of interest to Premiere. And then I am going to go back to my media browser, and in that same area, this folder here that was supposed to say power, but I'm not a great typist. These are the slideshows, or the slides for her first presentation. We did 2 of those. So I'm going to import that as well. All right, so if we take a look at these slideshow images, these are just static backgrounds that go along with her presentation. And if we take a look inside the camera folder, these top 3 are all recordings. So this first one, file 121, and the second one, file 122, are 2 different takes of her first presentation. We had a light that went out halfway through, and I didn't catch it, and she didn't say anything, so we had to reshoot it. And this third file is her second presentation. So we'll just go ahead and start with this second file here. Now, scrolling over, I can see that I recorded this at 29.97 frames per second, which, you know, my background is in television, so that's where I stay. But just double checking that in case there's any worry about what sequence I want to make later. And then scrolling over to the right, I can see that I shot this in high definition, 1920 by 1080. And I actually want to output it in the same thing, so I'm just going to edit the same way all the way through. I don't need to worry about rescaling anything, at least not at this point. So I'm going to create a sequence just by grabbing this clip and dragging it onto my timeline, like so. And it created a sequence. So I'm going to click that and rename it. And I want to call this Sister Malia 1, because I know there's going to be a 2. All right, and let me zoom my timeline out so it fits. Now, you can see that I've worked this footage before, and you can tell it by these little markers. Here, let me make that a little bit taller. So these little dots here are called markers. And Sister Malia sent me a script, a Word file that has all of her language written out, and it also has indications in there where each slide goes. Very organized. I really appreciate that. So I watched through this, and I placed a marker every time we got to a spot where the image is supposed to change. And if you haven't worked with markers before, it's really simple. First, just make sure that the clip you want to use is selected. And you know what? Let me delete this one, and let me go use this other file because I have no markers on it. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing.
Of living a Pono life.
All right, so let's pretend that was a critical moment. She says, living a Pono life, I'm supposed to change the slides there. So I just make sure that the clip is selected, which it is, and then I press the letter M on my keyboard. And it puts those little dots there. That's called a marker. And if I tap the letter M a second time, I'll get a little dialog box. So I can type notes to myself. So this is called Pono life. And my instruction will be switch. T-S-W-I-T-C. It's switch to slide 7. Let's pretend I know what I'm talking about. And I can even make the color change, right? So maybe I'll use purple for color changes, or the purple thing to indicate this is a slide change. And if there are other markers that I was going to put, like an editing marker to say she sneezed here or something, I would use a different color. And you can see that marker appears there on the timeline. Markers come in really handy in terms of just visual references. If you have snapping turned on, your playhead can snap to a marker when you're trying to do an edit. And you can also put markers on the timeline itself. Right now I've got the markers on this video file, but if I don't have anything selected and I press M, you'll see that it puts a marker here on the timeline and also up here in the program window. And again, that's just an easy way to move around. If you're looking to find a particular spot, you can use visual markers. Let me undo that. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that one and put the one back that already has all the markers in place. Okay. So in order to do the green screen, and you can see that I've shot this pretty carefully. I had her in front of my green screen across the hall. I had the lights set up nicely, so I shouldn't have too much trouble with this. If I look very carefully at the right-hand edge, there's kind of a dark patch there. I think that's going to cause me some problem a little bit further down the road, but I'll worry about that a little further down the road. So what will happen when I use the green screen effect is that all of this green will become transparent and it will see through to whatever's underneath the video. So at the moment, I'm going to worry about moving this video straight up one layer. So now I have an empty space underneath it. And that empty space is where the pictures are going to go. So if I were to grab like, well, let's just say it's slide 4. And I'm going to drop it underneath there. And let me zoom in a little bit. All right, so you can see that I have lined it up with that playhead. And just looking ahead, I'll probably want to stretch this until it reaches the next marker. I'm sorry, I lined it up with the marker, not the playhead, and then I stretch it to the next marker. So this is how convenient markers are. I know how long that image needs to be. So what will happen when I turn this top image transparent, at least the green part, is we will see past it to whatever's underneath it. All right. So I'm going to go over here in the Effects tab, and under Video Effects, there's an entire folder called Keying, and that is what I am looking for. Now, we've got a handful of things in here. The color key will do the job, but it doesn't have as many adjustments as the Ultra key. And the Ultra key will let me really refine this. I can make it look really good if I've got the patience. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Ultra key. Again, color key could probably do the job in this case. It would probably be faster, but I love to show things the hard way. These other ones, Luma key does the same thing, except it's not based on color, it's based on brightness or luminance. So if I wanted to replace something that was bright or something that was dark, for example, if I wanted to make her white habit disappear, maybe I'd go with a Luma key instead. And let's just not worry about what a track matte key or an alpha adjust does at the time. So I'm just going to grab my Ultra key and drag it over here onto the clip. And nothing happens. That's okay. So now I'm going to make sure that my clip is selected, and then I'm going to come up here to my Effect Controls tab. And this is always the way when you're working with effects, right? Put the effect on the clip, make sure the clip is selected, come up to the Effect Controls tab. And there's my Ultra key right there. Let me just close some of these other things down for the moment. They're just taking up space I'm not interested in. So the Ultra key has got a bunch of stuff that I can play around with. Right now, this is what I'm interested in, this key color. And you'll see there's an eyedropper next to it. Right now, the key color is set to black, so it's deleting whatever is black. If I grab that eyedropper, and as I move it around, notice that I'm actually able to pick up colors from anywhere on the screen. Right? If I point up here at this blue strip, see that my key color has become blue. If I came down here and pointed at this pink, my key color will become pink. What I want to do is point here at the green screen. And it actually might make a difference which part of the green I pick up. If I look really carefully, it's a little bit brighter up here at the top. I can see that there are some wrinkles down here towards the bottom where there's a little bit of darkness on the downside of the wrinkle. And definitely over here on the right side of the screen, there's a darker patch. So what I'm going to try to do is aim for something that seems to be a middle tone. Not the brightest green, but not the darkest green. And that's going to save me a little bit of work. And as soon as I turn this loose, ta-da! We have a partial success. Okay, there are two reasons it's partial. One is that I forgot to check the size of my images, my background image. You can see my background image is too small. That's an easy fix. But the other one I don't know if you can see it clearly on this capture, but there's all kinds of snow, little white dots in this area that tell me there's something wrong. This should be pure black. Well, let's do one thing at a time here. So the first thing, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to click on my background image so that it's selected. And then again, under Effect Controls, under the Motion tab, I'm going to come over here to my scale, and I'm going to bump that up to 150%. There we go. Now it fills the whole screen. And you might think that doesn't look too bad. Let's just give it a quick play and see what happens.
Where I went to play and where I went to pray. Walking home after the dismissal bell rang at St. Anthony.
Okay. If you look really carefully, and again, I hope it's showing up on the capture here, especially over here in the bottom right-hand corner where this, I think that's a tree stump is, but even up here in the mountains just over her head, there's static. Let me play it again, and then you can look really closely.
Kailua Beach was my life, where I went to play and where I went to pray. Walking home after...
That static means I have some work to do yet. So again, I'm going to click on the clip of Sister Malia and come over here to my Effect Controls tab in the top left-hand corner. And I have got 4 categories of adjustments here. I'm going to start with the first one and work my way down. But before I do that, it's a little bit challenging to look at this image and see if everything is clean or not. Especially, there's a lot of detail in the background, so maybe I don't see the snow. Maybe the snow just looks like texture. And we're not talking about real snow, right? We're talking about video noise. Snow is just a word for that. So here under Ultra Key where it says Output, Composite means it's showing me the composited image. It's showing me the final product. I'm going to drop that down. And I have 2 other choices, Alpha Channel and Color Channel. Let's just take a look at those. Alpha Channel is actually the one that I'm most interested in because it shows me in terms of black and white what's being ignored and what's being replaced. So anything that's pure black is being replaced. And we can see that close around the top of her head. Most of this is mostly black with a little bit of snow, but it definitely falls off towards the bottom of the screen. Everything that's white is being ignored, but I have to be careful because I can see there's some gray dots here in front of her face, and what that ultimately is going to end up being is her glasses. Her glasses are catching reflections of the green screen, and I'm not going to be able to easily do something about that. We'll see if I feel like working that or not. If I take this drop down and look at the other one, the color channel, what it has done is it's replaced the green background that it's keying out with this color neutral background, this kind of gray appearance. So I'm not actually seeing through the background image, but I'm not seeing nothing either. I don't like this because I have the same problem looking at this that I have looking at the composite image. I can't really tell if it's clean or not. But looking at this alpha channel, there's no doubt in my mind that part of this is clean and part of it is not. So I need to work on this. I need to do something to get this bottom. So I'm going to start by trying to select my key color again, because maybe if I pick something further down, I'll have a little more success. So actually doing that helped me a little bit. Now I can also tell this right side, I told you that was going to be a problem, didn't I? But maybe I'm making life harder for myself than I need to. Because she is actually, let me turn this off, she's in the middle of the screen, right? And she doesn't move her hands very much. So honestly, this chunk of green on the right side and this chunk of green on the left side, I don't need those to be keyed out. If there's an easier way to get rid of those, I should take it. And there is. Up here under the opacity effect, I'm going to grab this rectangular polygon mask. And you can see that I'm cutting this upper layer of video. And I am just going to stretch this out so that I can see her. But really, I'm not going to have much more space than I need. And let me just scrub back and forth to make sure she doesn't wave her hands. If she waves her hands and it goes outside of this border, her hand will get cut off, so I just need to make the border a little bit bigger. All right, so now I only have to worry about making this middle part of the screen clear, right? So when I turn my Ultra key back on, So rather than, let me turn the mask off real quick. Rather than having to clear, can I get rid of that silly thing? There we go. Rather than having to successfully clear this entire screen by using this mask, this opacity mask, I now only have to successfully clear the middle part of the screen. I don't have to worry about that right side or that left side where the light was falling off a little bit. Now my challenge might be this bottom right-hand corner. Okay. So back to my Ultra Key effect. This first thing, matte generation. Again, I've got 4 categories of adjustments here. Matte generation, matte cleanup, spill suppression, and color correction. And again, I'm just going to work my way through these, probably just the first 2. Now, each of these has got things hiding in it. So under matte generation, I've got transparency, highlight, shadow, tolerance, and pedestal. And you can see there are some preset default settings here. I'm just going to play with each of these to see what happens. All right, so I'm going to grab this 45, which is my transparency setting, and try pulling it to the right. Okay, that has made things so much worse. Sister Malia herself is disappearing, and that's not what I wanted. I want to drag it to the left and see what happens. Okay, if I drag it all the way to the left, nothing is disappearing. So somewhere in the middle, and as I slide this back and forth, what I'm going to watch for is making sure that nothing in what should be Sister Malia has any gray in it. I want to make sure that she is not being keyed out. Seems about 36, seems to be about as far as I can push it. Again, I've got a few spots right here where her glasses are, and that's not something I can fix this way. We'll come back to that. So highlight, this should affect the bright spots of the green screen. So again, if I click this back and forth, when I crank it all the way up, it's, that bright spot is not being keyed out at all. If I crank it all the way down, I don't see any harm coming from that, so we'll leave it all the way down. Shadow should do the same thing, so it should affect this bottom part of the screen where I'm having some problems. If I crank it all the way up, that made things so much worse. If I crank it all the way down, now I'm starting to lose her habit, and I don't want to lose that. So I'm going to push it up again until I'm convinced that there's nothing disappearing in her head. All right. Tolerance is how generous it is in interpreting that green. So I use the eyedropper to pick a very specific shade of green, but tolerance means it can be close to that green. So the lower I run it down, the more forgiving it is, and the higher I run it up, the more specific it is. And it is having remarkably little effect, so I'm just going to reset that at 50. And then pedestal is kind of like contrast, and I expect this will help a lot. If I run my contrast down, my pedestal down to 0, it's made it so much worse. If I crank it all the way up to 100, I don't really see anything wrong with that. And now that I've gotten pretty close, I'm actually going to go back and play with these again. I'm going to start back at the top with my transparency. That seems about as far as I can push it, about 39, so that didn't really change. My highlights. And actually, if I'm careful with this highlights, I can get a little bit of her glasses out of it, but I can't go too far or I lose the background behind the top of her head. And this really is the process. We're just going to keep doing this over and over and over. Shadow adjustment. Okay, tolerance still doesn't really seem to have any effect in this particular case, and I'm going to leave the pedestal cranked. Well, let's go ahead and just try. Yep, crank that all the way up and leave it be. So actually I've gotten pretty good just using these 5 adjustments. If I'm still having trouble though, this matte cleanup will give me maybe some help. I don't want to play with it quite yet. But choke would allow me to actually shrink the image that's being... And this will show up actually a little bit better in video than it does in this black and white image. Soften would give the edges a little bit of softness, which I tend to not like. Contrast is helping with the glasses just a little bit, but for the moment, again, I'm going to leave that alone. And then this midpoint setting, not having a lot of effect right now. I'm just going to reset that. We might have to come back to these in a second. Spill suppression, now this is a fun one. If you have things set up where the green light is bouncing off of your green screen and like landing on the tabletop that your model is sitting at or your talent is sitting at, then the top of that table is perceived by the camera to be green. Spill suppression can help with that. If you've got reflected green light coming off of your green screen or reflected blue light coming off of your blue screen or whatnot, playing with these settings can help. And then this last one, color correction, allows you to apply a little bit of color correction inside. Again, I don't want to look at that quite yet. So now that I think I've got this pretty close, I'm going to go back up here to my output and change it to composite again. And let's just play this and see how we did.
Growing up, Kailua Beach was my life, where I went to play and where I went to pray. Walking home after the dismissal bell rang at St. Anthony's School, I would abandon my hush puppies.
Okay, that looks pretty good to me. I'm not seeing any snow anywhere. I'm looking in the background in particular, and I'm looking around the edges of her person to make sure that I don't see any snow. I don't see any of the image bleeding through her, right? So there's no holes in her habit, there's no holes in her lei, there's no holes in her skin. If we watch the glasses...
To play and where I went to pray. Walking home after the dismissal bell rang at St. Anthony's School, I would abandon...
Okay, there is just a little bit of bleed through happening in the reflections of the glasses, but again, I know from experience I can't fix that this way. I can fix that using cloning, which is a different subject altogether. Okay, so now I have done it. I have successfully done a green screen. So now for this particular project, let me zoom back out. Really, all I would have to do is come along and continue to add the background slides. So I'll grab the next slide and stretch it to distance. And then I know from experience that I'm going to have to resize it. Right? So I'm going to click that, go into my motion tab, and scale it up to 150%. And this is going to be consistent. The PowerPoint images all came out at the same size. So I'm going to have to scale them all up by the same amount to fit on the screen. Speaking of scaling and moving, just for fun, since I've gotten my key going, I can do fun things with movement. So let's just see if we can't find... Okay, this would be a great example, this next image. So the way that she has composed this slide, let me resize that. The way that she has composed this slide, with her in the middle of the screen, she's blocking some very interesting background. I don't know what else is in that circle, but it seems to me that that's more important than this mountain background. So I'm actually going to take advantage of my ability to manipulate stuff and do that. So I'm going to come up to this. Let me zoom in a little bit. I'm going to use my razor blade to make a cut right here in the... Oops, let me undo that. I don't want to cut the audio and the video. I wanted just to cut the video. All right. And then, so for this middle chunk here, I'm just going to, again, click on Sister Malia to select her. And then using my motion controls, I am going to slide her over to this side of the screen. That way I can see more of what's going on in the background.
Like a sponge, always so nourishing. On the weekends, running to the seaside before sunrise.
And if I feel like that's a little bit of a jump cut, I can always drop a transition there now that I've made a cut. All right. So that's the basics of green screening, or of chroma keying. Let's use the proper term there. And it all starts, first shoot your talent in front of a solid colored background. And you want to be aware of two things. You want the color to be something that will be easy to replace. So steer away from colors that your talent is either wearing or that your talent is. Putting somebody in front of a brown background would be a terrible choice. You would never get a clean key because the skin would keep disappearing. The second thing is even lighting on the background makes a world of difference. You've just watched me spend, I don't know how long have we been doing this, 10 minutes, working on what was a really simple clip. If the lighting had been bad and that background had had more variation in it, I could easily spend half an hour working on that and still be frustrated at the end. So shoot it carefully when you're planning to do green screen. But then when you bring it into Premiere, move your video up to video layer 2 or higher, drop the Ultra Key filter on it, spend some time getting your adjustments, and then put your background layer underneath it on video layer 1. And Bob's your uncle. There you go. The perfect green screen. All right. Moving forward, I do want to talk a little bit about cloning. We'll do that in a later video. And, well, there's so many other things I want to talk about. There's not really much point in listing them. I'll see you for the next video.